Hakadosh Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, Masechet Yevamot Daf Amud Aleph. We were just speaking about yesterday the entire concept of Rav Zvid, where we wanted to find out about what about if a woman right now is she able to have children or not. So the Gemara says, Rav Zvid Amar, Rav Zvid comes and he says, En banim belo simanim. It does not exist that a woman will give birth without any simane gadlut, which means that how could it be that a woman is going to give birth if she has no children? So therefore, a yitoma, an orphan, cannot do mi'un after she already gives birth, because then she's already considered a gedolah. She's already considered a gedolah. Gedolah means she's already considered a woman, and therefore she cannot do mi'un. Remember, mi'un is a girl that the father died, and therefore the father does not do kiddushin, but kiddushin is doraita. So it was the mother or the brother, and therefore when she becomes before bat mitzvah, she could do mi'un. Mi'un means she comes and she renounces the marriage. However, though, once she has a child, I mean, she's not a katan anymore. She's a gdolah. So therefore, what? Em banim belo simanim. So says the Gemara, v'nivdok. Why don't we check if she has simanim? So answers the Gemara, chayshin anshem anashru. We're going to suspect that maybe the hairs fell out, which means she did have her pubic hairs, which means she was a gdolah, but we're going to suspect that maybe they fell out, and because they fell out, that's why we're going to come and we're going to say that she was still a gedolah. So says the Gemara, Hani chalaman damar. This is good according to the mandamar chosheshin, that we are going to suspect that maybe be'emet the hairs fell out. But according to the mandamar en chosheshin, that we're not going to suspect that the hairs are going to fall out. Ma'ikal meimar. What are we going to say exactly? So the Gemara answers, Afilu lemandamar en chosheshin. Even according to the mandamar, that we are not going to suspect right to anything, which means we're not going to suspect that maybe there was hairs and they fell out. We are going to say that maybe because of tsar leida they could fall out, which means like this. In a normal scenario, right, there's two machloket. One person says we do suspect that the hairs will fall out. Another one says we do not suspect the hairs will fall out. But in this case scenario, the fact that we are going to come and we are going to say that there is tsar leida for sure the hairs are going to go out, and therefore we're going to come and we are going to suspect it. Okay, so until here it's very, very clear. These are the two dots, right? That we're going to start now, right? The new two dots. So now says the Gemara as follows. Okay, we are by the two dots. Ketzad potrot tzarotehen, right? So basically we're going back to the Mishnah, the original Mishnah, right on above on Bet Amud says that there's going to be 15 women. Right, 15 women that they are going to come and they're going to be potrot tzarotehen from chalitza nibum. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to ask, how do we know that tzarat erva is poteret tzarata? Okay, so it says how do we know these words? Answers the Gemara of Yehuda, says Yehuda the Markab, it says in a pasuk litzror. Since it says litzror, haTorah dibtzat tzarot arbeh. Because since it says over here, the pasuk says, the word litzror means that anerva is poteret tzarata, nibum, vechalitza. Now, it could have written latzor. Why did it write litzror? To teach you that even at tzarat erva also is poteret tzarata. So there's tzarot harbe. There's a lot of them. Okay? Another shita, Ravashi says, is not Rav Yehuda. So the first shita was Rav Yehuda. Comes Ravashi and he says, Svarahi, it's a logic. Why is it a logic? Tsara maitama asira. What's the reasoning why when you have a tsara, what is the reasoning why she's asur to do with the erva yibum? Tevimkom erma kaima. Because she is as if that she's falling to yibum with the erva. So tsara nami, so too when you have the tsara, bimkom erva kaima. She's like coming with the erva to fall to do yibum. So therefore, she's like, right, both of them together are coming in front of the person. And since obviously the erva cannot do the yibum, so too also the tzarata cannot do the yibum. Okay, fine. Says now the Gemara, the next two dots. Keita, what's the case? Im metu hen, if the 15 of them, they died, tzarotehen mutarot, you're going to tell me now that it's muteret? So now we're going to say as follows. Vafilu kanas ulvasov kiresh, which means it comes out of that from the words of the Mishnah, it comes out that even in a case where the husband got married to the tzara, And then afterwards, he divorced the erva, okay? Which means that when the husband died, there was no erva married anymore, okay? And therefore, it's not considered tzarat erva. And therefore, you're going to tell me that what? Still, it's going to be poter. So says the Gemara, Uruminu, we have a contradiction, right? I'm going to share the screen with everybody, right? What is the case? Uruminu, we have a contradiction. Shlosha achim. There are three brothers. Here you have them, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Three brothers, okay? Shnai mehem nesuim shete achayot. Two of them are married to two sisters. So here you have Shimon and Levi, married to two sisters, Rachel and Leah, okay? Giresh echad mi baalei achayot ishto. So now one of them got divorced, okay? Right? So what happens is, Shimon gets divorced to Rachel, okay? And meta nasui nochrit. So Reuven dies, that he was married to the stranger. Okay, so one more time. Reuven, Shimon, Levi are brothers. Rachel and Leah are sisters. Two brothers getting married to two sisters. Shimon divorces Rachel, okay? And Reuven dies. Remember that Reuven got married to Tzila. Tzila had nothing to do with the picture. She was like a stranger. That's what it means, the nochrit over here. That's what it says, number one. Reuven, Shimon, Levi are brothers. Rachel and Leah are sisters. Reuven gets married to Tzila, and Shimon takes Rachel, and Levi takes Leah, which those are the two sisters, right? Shimon gets divorced from Rachel, and Reuven dies without any children. Okay? Now what happens is, Uknasaham Garesh. So now Shimon was the Megaresh, correct? Shimon divorced his wife, Rachel. So Shimon Amgaresh, he got married to Tzila. But remember, Reuven first died. So if Reuven dies, Shimon comes and he does Ibum to Tzila. Okay? Then what happens? Shimon dies. Okay? So now Shimon dies. Now you have Tzila that was married to Shimon. And he was previously married to Rachel. So says the Gemara, on this case, she met to onit karshu, that if they died or they got divorced, tzarotehem mutarot. So in this case, Shimon that got divorced from his wife, right? So what happens is that now, right, what's going to happen? So that's what it says over here. So it says, Zui shamru chachamim shimetu nigashu tzarotehen mutarot. Hainu shimeta nigasha Rachel kodem shenasa Shimon et Tzila muteret Tzila leLevi. So now Tzila could get married to Levi. Why? In a normal case, let's say pretend that Shimon was still married to Rachel. So now what happens is that Levi cannot get married, cannot do Yibum to Rachel. That's it's achot ishto. So since it's achot ishto, right? Rachel is ptura. And Tzila would have been P'tura. Why Tzila would have been P'tura? Because it's Sarat Achot Ishto. Okay? So because he got divorced beforehand, so that's what's going to be permitted. Ta'ama de Giresh. The reason why is because he divorced her. And then he got married to Tzila. Aval Kanas, but if he first got married to Tzila and only afterwards he divorced Rachel, lo. Right? What would have happened? So she wouldn't have been permitted to do the Yibum. Now this is a stira for a Mishnah. Right? Because I thought it all had to do at the time of the death of Shimon, not at the time when it was done. Okay? Which means that what's going on over here? There's a problem. Okay? So that's the stira. Everyone understood the stira?
I thought it says
yeah.
Even if
so one more time. 1 second. So the Gemara, Rabbi Yomi says, Tavra. Be'emet, this is a stira. Mi sheshana zo, lo shana zo. The one that taught this Mishnah did not teach this Mishnah, which means the two Tanaim, be'emet, they do agree that a tzara, right, is not going to be a surah lityabem only in a case of tzarat erva during the time of the nefilah liibum. Meaning, I don't care what happens beforehand. I want to take care of what happens during the time when they fall to yibum, when they're going to do yibum. But then what is the machloket? The machloket is the shata nefilah. Hai Tana, this Tana of our Mishnah Savar holds, Shemita mapelet. What does that mean? The death of the husband is what brings the wives to the yibum. And therefore it wasn't his wife. But at the end of the day, with the time that he died, he already divorced. Who did he divorce? He divorced, right? Rachel, right? So since he divorced Rachel, that's it. The Haitana and the other Tana the Mishnah and the Perek Shlishi Savar Nisuim Arishonim Mapilim, which means the fact that when he got married, right, when she got married to her husband, that's what already comes and throws her to the Yibum. And therefore, if right now, right, it was his wife, right, he says, if it was once upon a time already a Tzarat Erva, she's already a Suralit Yabem. And then that's it. And there's nothing what to do. So therefore, that is the machloket between the two different ones. What exactly is the cause of the Yibum? Do you say that the cause of the Yibum is the Mitah, which means that the Mitah is Mapelet? Or do you say that no, that Nisuim Arishonim Mapelim, and therefore it's not the actual Mitah, but rather it's the Nisuim Rishonim? Rava comes and he says, now we're going to bring another dea, another opinion, that according to that, there's not going to be a contradiction between the two different Mishnayot. Rava comes and he says, Le'olam Chatanahu. Really, Be'emet, it's not two different Tanaim. Because what did we just answer? The first answer was, whoever taught this one didn't teach this one, which means there are two different Tanaim. One Tana taught the Mishnah in Perek Shlishi, that he held the marriage is what makes the Yibum or not. So the second that he got married to one, and they were both married at the same time, I don't care if at the time of the death, he already divorced one, it doesn't matter. And the other ones in our Mishnah says, no, that everything has to do with Bishat Met, Bishat Mitah. That's when the Nefilah comes out. Rava comes and he says, really, Be'emet, it's one Tana. Vezo ve'en tzarich lomar zo katani. Which means we're always going to teach the bigger Chidush. After teaching the bigger Chidush, then we're going to teach the other Chidush, which is much less, in Perek Shlishi. So therefore, what happens is like this. He wanted to say that any time that there was halacha zu, which is in a lighter place, in our Mishnah was halacha ikarit. Halacha ikarit is that tzara is muteret lityabem, even if she was married to the ach before the girushin, right? So too why? Because it was tzara terva. Afterwards, it came up to give us a more pashut halacha that if the ach got married to the tzara after he already got married, got divorced the first one, for sure she's going to be muteret, right? Why? Because she was never tzara terva. That means the first one was a bigger chidush, right? The first one is that they were both married at the same time, right? But what happened? As long as he divorced her before, when he dies, now I check. The second shita, which is the Mishnah and Perek Shlishi, is giving us a less chidush. What is the less chidush? The less chidush is that in a case where he divorced her before getting married to Tzila, before getting married to the Reuven's wife, right? Reuven was the brother that died, right? Getting married to her, still she's going to be Ptura. But there, it's a much less chidush. Why is it much less chidush? Because there, it was never Tzara Terva. When he went and he got married to Tzila, he wasn't married to Rachel anymore. So this Tzila never became Tzara Terva. The Terva was never there when he came into the picture. So because of that, that's what we said. They're both different cases. And that's how we finished the two dots. The Mishnah finishes off, but this is by the two dots where it says, any one of the arayot that she could come and she could do miyun, right? And she did not do miyun. She only does chalitza and not yibum. Okay? Says the Gemara, 1 second. Utmaen hashta, right? What does that mean? This girl, why doesn't she do miyun right now? Right now, tell her to do miyun. Remember, when she does miyun, what happens? What happens when she does miyun? Now the other one, right, since retroactively it went away the marriage, so therefore what happens? And right now she could do the tzarata, could do yibum. So lema mesele, what does this come to bring us a proof? The Rav Oshia to Rav Oshia. Tamar Rav Oshia, but says Rav Oshia, mema'enet lema'amaro, ve'ena mema'enet lezikato. Which means like this: when you have a yitoma, remember, whenever we're talking about miyun, we're talking about a yitoma, right? Because it only exists by a yitoma miyun. Okay? Yes. Yeah, yitoma is only by, right, a girl that she doesn't have a father. Because if the father married her off, there's nothing what to talk about. There's no miyun. So therefore, we're talking about yitoma ktana, that she was married through the brother or the mother, and then she falls to yibum. So she could only do miyun to ma'amaro shel yavam. Remember, ma'amaro shel yavam means is that if he does a kiddushin now, whether it's through kesef or shtar, money or document, she could do miyun to that, but she cannot do miyun the zikato, to a zikah, which means that if he's going to come and he's going to get married to her. So here the Gemara explains in Kuzayim Mudalev that which Bet Hillel comes and says that Yitoma could do miyun biyavam it's not the kavanah that she could do miyun to the kesher of the zikah, to the connection that she has between her and the yavam, and therefore completely uprooted. But the kavanah is that if the yavam did ma'amar, she could come and uproot the ma'amar. So he says, why? Now, if she comes and she does the miyun to the ma'amar, she goes back to her original status, right? That the yevama, she needs to do the yavam, she becomes like a yevama, which is needed for yavam with a ma'amar. So therefore, if the yavam does not want her to get married off, she has to do chalitza. She has to do chalitza in order to take away the keshet. Now, even though b'derech klal, once a yavam does a ma'amar, right, and now he doesn't want to get married to her, he has to give her also a get to get rid of the ma'amar. Nevertheless, in this case, you don't need a get because the ma'amar was uprooted through the miyun. Okay. Now, this is what Rav Oshia is saying. The yitumah, right? She could come and only be mima'in in the ma'amaro, but she cannot be mima'in in zikato, which means to completely uproot it. She could only uproot it during the lifetime of the husband. Once the husband dies, she cannot uproot anymore the marriage. She could only uproot a ma'amar, but then she still needs to do chalitza. That is the shita of Rav Oshia. So therefore, he's coming and he's saying this is a proof to Rav Oshia that mima'enet l'ma'amaro ve'ena mima'enet l'zikato. So this says the Gemara, no, it's not true. Our Mishnah, why? Our Mishnah holds that Yitama Ktana could do miyun b'zikata yibum and also to uproot it completely, right? But tzarat erva shane. This is a case of tzarat erva. What does that mean? Chachamim made a gzira that even if the Yitoma will come and uproot it completely, nevertheless tzarata is a surah because it looks like tzarat erva. Meaning in this case, even though she could still uproot it, remember one more time, she could come and still uproot completely the marriage according to our Mishnah. There's two different opinions. One opinion says after the husband dies, Kadish, she cannot uproot the marriage retroactively. She could only uproot a ma'amar, right? But she cannot uproot and she does chalitza, but she cannot uproot the original marriage. According to our Mishnah, he says, no. She could still uproot the entire marriage. But here it's different. Here, what happens is it still looks like, right, tzarat erva. The fact that it looks like tzarat erva, that's why we say, Chachamim made a gezerah, that even if she would do it, they still need the chalitza. The Tani Rami Bar Yecheskel, because Rami Bar Yecheskel came and he taught, Mi'ana ba'al muteret le'aviv. You guys remember, we already learned this, that if she comes and she does miyun to her husband when he's alive, she's now permitted to get married to the husband's father. I mean, she could get married to her father-in-law, right? Why? Because once she uprooted the marriage, there was no marriage. So now all of a sudden the father is not prohibited to get married to her because now it's the daughter-in-law. It's not true. Because once you say it was completely uprooted, there was no marriage. However, though, the second that she does miyun to the yavam, now all of a sudden she is prohibited to the father, right? Meaning to the, again, this is now to the father. Now, why exactly? Alma, so you see from here, mishat nefila niret kekalato. The second that she falls to yibum, she looks like a daughter-in-law, right? And that means beforehand, she didn't look like a daughter-in-law. Why? Because she could renounce the marriage and she was never married. Once she starts to do yibum, even though she comes and she does the renouncing, it still looks like a daughter-in-law. So it's a problem. Now she can't get married to the father anymore. Hachanami, so to hear mishat nefila, from the time that it falls to the yavam, to do yibum, niret ketzarat bito. It looks like tzarat bito, which is doing the miyun, and therefore, even though the miyun completely uproots it, the mafreya, it still appears to it. And since it still appears to it, so because of that, that's why we prohibit doing it's not going to permit them from doing the yibum. And that's with that we finish until the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Shesh arayot chamurot me'elu. There's going to be 6 arayot, 6 cases of arayot, which are stricter than these 15 that we learned in the Mishnah. And what is the chumrah? The chumrah is that they cannot get married le'achiv me'aviv ela le'adam acher. They cannot get married to the brothers, to the fathers, le'achiv, right? Le'achav me'aviv, meaning the brothers mitzad the father, but rather to someone else. Why? Because they are married to other people and not to the brothers from the father. So therefore, right, tzarotehen mutarot. So their tzarot are going to be permitted. And what are these cases? Imo, the mother, Eshet Aviv, the father's wife. Achot Aviv, the father's sister, which is an aunt. Achoto me'aviv, right? We're talking about now Achot Aviv, right? Achoto me'aviv, meaning his sister from the father. Meaning again, he's a half sister, but it's only from the father. Eshet Achi Aviv, right? The wife of Achi Aviv, meaning the uncle's wife. Ve'eshet Achi me'aviv, and the wife of the brother from his father. We're going to now share, right, the screen, and we're going to explain Imo, right? So listen, look carefully, right? Picture number one. Chana is an almana grusha. Okay, Chana is an almana grusha. Now she has a child, right? What's the child's name? Reuven. Right? Now what happens is Vetinase Chana le Moshe. Moshe gets married to Chana. Un Moshe odisha ushma Esther. So Esther is the other wife. So now you have Chana and you have Esther. Esther is another wife of Moshe, and Chana is the wife of Moshe. But remember, the Chana already had a previous son called Reuven. Umet Moshe. Moshe dies. Muteret Esther le Reuven, afal pi she'itzarat imo. Esther is muteret to Reuven. Why? Because, right, it's tzarat imo. That means even though it's tzarat imo, it's a tzara of his mother, right? It says over here muteret, right? Now, why though? It makes very much sense. Because at the end of the day, right, remember that this is not, Moshe was never his father. Moshe was a stepfather. It's never his father. So therefore, this is called tzarat imo, right? That all of a sudden, it's permitted. So in this case, it's permitted. So Reuven can now get married to the stepfather's wife. Okay? Even though she's considered a co-wife with his mother, Chana. Case number two, Eshet Aviv. What is Eshet Aviv? Let's go again. Yaakov and Rachel, ish v'isha. So here you have Yaakov and Rachel are husband and wives. Yaakov had a ben, Reuven, from another wife. So not from Rachel. Reuven came from Yaakov from another wife. Yaakov dies. Okay, v'tinaseh Rachel Moshe. So now Rachel gets married to Moshe. Okay, now what happens is, and now remember, there's no yibum until here, right? Because remember, Yaakov had a child, so there's no yibum here, and Moshe has nothing to do with Yaakov. Okay, so Yaakov has a child, Reuven. Yaakov gets married to Rachel. Yaakov dies. Rachel gets married to Moshe. Moshe had another wife called Esther. Moshe dies. So now what happens? Esther is permitted to get married to Reuven, even though it's Sarat Eshet Aviv. Right? That means here, it was not Sarat Imo, because Rachel was not his mother. But Rachel was Eshet Aviv. Okay? Rachel was the wife of his father. Here, Esther is Sarat Eshet Aviv, because Esther is now a co-wife with Rachel when she's married to Moshe. But still, it's permitted. Okay, so in this case, it's going to be permitted. Eshet Aviv. Case number three, Achot Aviv. What is Achot Aviv exactly? Yaakov and Chana, Ach ve'Achot. So you have Yaakov and Chana, which are brothers and sisters. Here you have them. Yaakov and Chana, brother and sister. Okay, Yaakov and Chana. Yaakov already had a previous son called Reuven. Okay, the Tinaseh Chana le Moshe. Now Chana gets married to Moshe. Moshe had another wife, Esther. So until here, we're all clear. Moshe dies. Muteret Esther le Reuven, afal pi she'ayta tzarat achot aviv, which means it is. Even though now this is achot aviv, this is the sister, meaning this is his aunt. This is the co-wife of his aunt, right? Here, he's permitted to get married to the co-wife of his aunt. So he's permitted to get married to Esther, even though it's the co-wife of his aunt, of achot aviv. Okay, next case, achoto me'aviv. Yeah, what does that mean? Achoto me'aviv is now like the following. Yaakov has a child, Reuven, and he has a child, Dinah. So Yaakov has Reuven and Dinah, brothers and sisters. Dinah gets married to Asher, and Asher has another wife, Shifra. Asher dies. So now Shifra is permitted to get married to Reuven, even though it's Sarat Achoto me'aviv. That means basically it's his sister's co-wife, right? It's his sister from the father, obviously, right? It's his sister's co-wife, but he's allowed to get married to them. Okay, 1 second. Okay. So now Eshet Achi Aviv. So Eshet Achi Aviv is now as follows, right? Reuven and Shimon are brothers. That's over here. Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Shimon has a wife, Rachel, and Reuven has a son, Chanoch. Shimon dies. Okay, so now what happens is Dan Dan takes Rachel. And Dan has another wife, Naomi. And Dan dies. Muteret Naomi lachanoch. So Naomi is muteret to Chanoch, even though it's tzarat eshet achi aviv. Even though it's the tzara of eshet achi aviv, of the aunt. Because here, the meaning is, it's the uncle, meaning the wife of the uncle, which is by the aunt. So this Rachel, that she was the wife, this is becoming now permitted. The next case is going to be, right, the following. Eshet achiv me'aviv. What is eshet achiv me'aviv? So Reuven, right, and Shimon are brothers, again, from the father. Yeah. Shimon has a wife, which is Leah. Yeah. Shimon dies, okay? Moshe takes Leah. Moshe has another wife, Esther. Moshe dies. So now Esther is permitted to get married to Reuven, even though it's Sarat Eshet Achiv Me'aviv. Okay? Very good. And now we're going to continue with the next case, okay? Which is the Bet Shammai. So Bet Shammai comes, and Bet Shammai says is the following. Bet Shammai says, Matirin tzarot la'achim. Bet Shammai permits the tzarot to the brothers. Ubet Hillel osrim. And Bet Hillel come, and they're going to be oser. Okay? Yud Gimel Ubet. Chaltzu. Right now, what happens in a case where they did chalitza? So Bet Shammai poslim min ha-keuna. Bet Shammai come and they say that they're going to be pasul from the keuna. Bet Hillel machshirin. And Bet Hillel says they're going to be kasher from the keuna. Nityabmu, if they did yibum. Bet Shammai says they're going to be kasher for yibum, for the keuna. And Bet Hillel says they're going to be pasul to the keuna. Okay? Which means that, remember, that when Yevamah is permitted to get married through chalitza, automatically she becomes prohibited to a kohen. Okay, this is an isud rabbanan, because the chalitza is like a grusha. Okay, so therefore, which is a surah to a kohen. So therefore, also in chalitza, which is like a gerushin, right? That's why they prohibited it as well. Okay, so according to Bet Shammai, sarat erva is a surah to do marriage even without chalitza, and if so, the chalitzata is a chalitza poselet tota la kiuna. According to Bet Hillel, there's no zikat yibum between the tzarat erva to the yavam, and therefore she doesn't she doesn't need chalitza, and therefore if she doesn't need chalitza, even if she did do chalitza, she's still kosher to the kohen, but she didn't need to do the chalitza. So if you didn't need to do the chalitza, so therefore there doesn't prohibit her to a kohen. Now says the Mishnah, af al pi she'elu osrim ve'elu matirin, even though Bet Hillel prohibit the tzarot and Bet Shammai permit the tzarot, elu poslim ve'elu machshirin, and these ones prohibit, right, certain men and they permit certain men. Lo nimneu Bet Shammai minisad nashim Bet Hillel, lo Bet Hillel Bet Shammai. They still got married to within each other. Kol ha'ta'arot ve'tumot shehayu elu metarim ve'elu metamin, lo nimneu osim ta'arot elu al gabei elu. They used to come. That means even though they prohibited or they permitted, or they would still get married between each other. They would still do all these things, right, between each other. That was, which is very, very, actually very important, right, to what we're talking about. That's the Gemara. We were starting now the Gemara, and the Gemara says as follows. Amar B'Shimon Pazi, says B'Shimon Pazi. My Ta'ama de Bet Shammai. What's the reasoning of Bet Shammai? Dichtiv, it says in a pasuk in Devarim, Lo tieh eshet hameta chutza leish zar. What does it mean that, remember, according to Shita Bet Shammai, why did they permit liyabem tzarat erva? It says in a pasuk, Lo tieh eshet hameta chutza leish zar. The word chutza is chitzona, which means that she's not connected to the yavam. So it's written ki'ilu lo tieh eshet hameta chitzona leish zar. Miklal dika pnimit. So it's mashma that there is a woman that she's on the inside, right? Which means that she is krovat to the yavam. And if so, the pasuk is telling you that in such a case where the achamet hiniach shte nashim, one of them is krovat to the yavam and one of them is not krovat. The Torah says lo tieh. What does it mean lo tieh? Leish, right, leish zar, yevama yevolea, which means that from here we have the din of yibum b'tzarat erva. Bet Hillel, however, according to Bet Hillel, nibai lehu lechd Rav Yehuda Amarav. They hold like Rav Yehuda Amarav. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav, it says Rav Yehuda Amarav, minayin shen kiddushin tofsim beyevama. How do we know that kiddushin does not tofes to yevama? Which means this: you have a yevama that she's waiting to do, right, yibum. Somebody comes and he does kiddushin to her. How do we know that it doesn't chal? Somebody comes to a woman that she's waiting to do yibum, and he does kiddushin. Okay. Right? How do we know, right, that the kiddushin are not going to be tofsim? Right? That means it's not a good kiddushin. There's no kiddushin for zar, which means like this. Usually, a negative commandment, even though there's an avera, it's still a marriage. Meaning the marriage is still a marriage.
Exactly.
Here, though, what we're trying to say, though,
So
is that does not happen, which means that it's not considered a marriage at all. So how do you learn that? From Lotieh Shatamet Chutz Leishzar means there's no Havaya Leishzar, which means that there's no Kiddushin. The Kiddushin are not Chalim. Bet Shammai, and according to Bet Shammai, Miktiv Lechutz. It doesn't say Lachutz means to the outside. Chutz Aktiv. It's written outside, which means that she's not a family member. Okay? Bet Hillel, but according to Bet Hillel, Kevan Dichtiv Chutza, Keman Dichtiv Lechutz Tamid. The fact that it says Chutza, it's like written Lachutz, because remember, many times when it says, right, the hey, it's like Lachutz, right? And instead of writing the Lamed, so you say Chutza. The Tanya, but we learned in a Braita. Rabbi Nechemia says, Kol teva shetzricha lamed betchilata, any word that you need a lamed at the beginning, hitil la hakatuv hey besofa, you put a hey at the end, right? V'tana dve bishven, so Tana bishven, they taught it, kigon elim, elima, meaning I'm traveling to Elim. How do you say it? Ani olech le'elim. I don't have to say le'elim. I say ani olech elima, to Elim, because instead of the lamed at the beginning, I added it to the beginning. Lemachanaim, machanaima, mitzrayim, instead of lemitzrayim, mitzrayima, divlataima, right? Instead of ledivlataim, Yerushalayim, Yerushalayima, midbara, all those words. So according to Shita Bet Hillel, it's like written la chutz. So what does it mean la chutz? Even though usually in a regular case, if somebody comes and does kiddushim to a lav, to a negative commandment, kiddushim are tofsim, except for Shitat Rabbi Akiva, obviously. But I'm saying kiddushim is tofsim. Here there's a special pasuk when it says lo tiyeh shetamet achutza leish zar. It means that the eshetamet should not be lachutz leish zar, which is a pasuk miyuchad. Comes Bet Hillel and says, teaches you, even if somebody from the outside would come to this Yevamah that she's waiting to do Yibum, and he would give her kiddushin, wallow, there's nothing there. It's as if the guy didn't do anything. He gave her a ring, doesn't matter. He gave her a present, but there's no kiddushin. There's nothing there. That is shitat Bet Hillel. Bet Shammai, that Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Menalahu. So according to Bet Shammai, how do we know? How does he know this din that kiddushin are not going to be tofsim by Yevamah? And so the Gemara milish zar nafka. They don't learn it from the chutza. Because remember, chutza, they learned that chutza, according to Bet Hillel, he learned chutza is lachutz, that it cannot get married to somebody else strange. According to Bet Shammai, that wasn't that. Chutza just means that there's a family relation, right? So how did they learn this halacha? He says lish zar. From the word that it says esh tamid lish zar, it comes and teaches you that en kiddushin tofsim beyevama. Okay? Bet Hillel nami tevulim lish zar. Why doesn't Bet Hillel also learn it from lish zar? Says the Gemara, enachenami. You're right. Right? You're right. They could learn it from Lizar. So chutza lamali. Why do I need chutza? Lerabot et arusa ledin yibum. What does that mean? This comes to teach you that even if a woman would be nitalmena, that means she became an almana, even though she's an arusa and not nisua. Remember, arusa means that she only did kiddushin and not nisuin. She's asura liot lizar because it says a chutza, and a chutza means a chitzona, which means that still there was not. Right, that's what it says over here. So therefore, right, that means it's coming to teach you that even in Arusa, you still have to wait. So he says ve'idach and the other mandama, which is basically Bet Shammai, right? Michutza hachutza. They learn it from hachutza because it just says chutza. Chutza already teaches you that there's a blood relation. What is hachutza? It teaches you that in Arusa it also is going to be the same halacha as a nesua. The ida chutza hachutza lemoshlo. However, the Bet Hillel, they don't like this entire concept of chutza, ha-chutza. So because they don't learn like this concept of chutza and ha-chutza, that's why they didn't want to learn this. Okay? That is the shita of Bet Hillel. Now the Gemara is going to explain another shita in Bet Shammai, why they permitted, right, yibum to tzarat erva. Okay? Rava Amar. Rava comes and he says, Tamayu de Bet Shammai, the reasoning of Bet Shammai is, the en isur chal al isur. There's no such thing as one isur to be chal another isur. So here I'm going to share with you the screen again in order that you understand. Right? Rav Amar Tamad Bet Shammai. Right? And then we're going to say Teinach. Okay, so let's see exactly. What is the case exactly? The case is as follows. Teinach hecha dinasa met ve'achakach nasachai. I understand in a case where the brother, right, which was that dies, got married to his wife. And only afterwards, the brother, which is alive, gets married to her sister, right? So lo ati isur achotisha v'chayil al isur eshetach. So the isur of the chotisha, which is his wife's sister, is not going to be chal on the isur of eshetach. But if the nasa chay and afterwards nasa met, achotisha kadim, which means like this: you've got two isurim here. You've got achotishto, and you have, right, achotishto, which is basically your sister-in-law, plus you have eshet ach, which is basically the brother's wife, okay, when that's what you're doing yibum to. So it all depends who got married first. So it says the Gemara, and this is where it is. Reuven and Shimon are brothers. So that's what it says here. Achim, brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Okay? Reuven gets married to Rachel, okay? And he also was married to Leah, okay? Yeah. And Shimon, to Miriam, and Shimon takes Leah. So Rachel and Leah are sisters, okay? So you have Reuven getting married to Rachel, Shimon getting married to Leah. So two brothers getting married to two sisters. Reuven also had Miriam. Now Reuven dies without any children, okay? Now says the Gemara, I understand, right? And that's what we're saying over here, okay? I understand, right? In such a case, Teina checha, it's good in a case where Eshet Amet, which means the Ach which dies got married first, which means Reuven got married to Rachel first, and therefore Rachel becomes prohibited, right, to Shimon because of Eshet Ach. Right? That means right now, 1 second, Reuven gets married to Rachel. Shimon, what is he to Rachel? Eshet Ach. So now, when Shimon gets married to Leah, right, what happens is there's another Isur which comes on, was Achot Ishto. So now I'm going to say that we don't say Isur Chalal Isur, which means the Isur of Achot Ishto does not add on because she was already prohibited because of Eshet Ach. So Teinach, that's going to happen, makes sense. But in a case of the other way around, which means the exact same case, Reuven and Shimon are Achim, Rachel and Leah are Achayot, and Miriam is over here. And Shimon who got first, that's why the Aleph is by here. Shimon first got married to Leah, right? And then Reuven got married to Rachel. So now what happens? Shimon, when he got married to Leah, what is Rachel prohibited to him? As what? As Achot Ishto. Only afterwards did it also become Eshet Ach. So in such a case, right, we are going to say that there's already the prohibition over there. Right? That's what it says over here. Right? Right? Is kadim. Here the Isur of Eshet Ach was before. So that's what we say over here. So answers the Gemara. Kevan. Yeah, Kevan. Kevan de lo ati Isur Eshet Ach v'chayla Isur Achot Isha. Right? Which means the Gemara is now going to explain the reasoning of Rava in the reasoning of Bet Shammai. They come and they say like this: since the Isur of Eshet Ach is not chal on the Isur of Achot Isha, right? So it comes out that the Yevama was never prohibited with the Isur of Eshet Ach. So she's never falling to Yibum, right? To the Yavam. So therefore, her tzara is considered tzarat erva shelo bimkom mitzvah, and therefore she's permitted to get married to do the Yibum.
So who's permitted?
Okay?
Now?
The Gemara now says in the Mishnah, whereby the two daughters where it says chaltzu, which means that they did chalitza. So chaltzu tzarot shel arayot leyavam. Bet Shammai poslim min hakihuna, and Bet Hillel said they're going to be kasher to the kihuna. Okay? Says the Gemara, Pshita, obviously, if according to Bet Shammai, this tzara needs to do yibum, so therefore her chalitza is a chalitza, and therefore obviously she becomes psula to the Kohen. And if according to Bet Hillel, the tzara is ptura from the yibum, so for the chalitza is nothing. So if the chalitza is nothing, she doesn't become disqualified to the Kohen. It makes sense, meaning it's obviously. So says the Gemara, le'apuke de Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. This comes to exclude Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Why? Te'amar, because they said, Bo'u nitkakem lahem latzarot, shiu choltzot velo mityavmot. Why don't we come and we should make that at least they should do chalitza? Meaning when we came and we said that the tzarot of the arayot, they are completely patur from everything. Everything means they don't even have to do chalitza. Ask the Gemara, they should at least do chalitza and not yibum, right? So Kamash Malan comes teach you the Bet Hillel machshirin. Bet Hillel come and they say they're kosher for kihuna because at the end of the day they never instituted like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Meaning Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri came and he said one second. Our Mishnah says Potrot mina chalitza or mina yibum. From both. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri wanted to institute they should still do, right, chalitza. Now, if they do chalitza, they become prohibited to the Kohen. Comes Bet Hillel and say, no, they're permitted to the Kohen, but they never actually did that. Okay? Next, the two dots. When it says nityabmu, what happens now if the tzarot did yibum? So Bet Shammai says that they're going to be kosher for Kuna, and Bet Hillel says the pasul. Hatu lamali, why do I need this case? For sure, right, each one according to their shita. So says the Gemara, you're right. I did the Tana Chaltzu, Tana Nityabmu. The second we taught about chalitza, we taught about yibum, even though it's obvious the outcome as well. Okay? So Tran Hatam, we learned over there in Masechet Megillah, Bet Amud Aleph. Megillah Nikret, right? Because now we're going to go in between the shitot of the Shakish and Rabbi Yochanan to do with what we learned in our Mishnah. Okay? Megillah Nikret, ב-11, ב-12, ב-13, ב-14, ב-15. Lo pachot v'lo yoter. Mamash, we're just reading this right after Purim. Imagine. So it comes over here and it says, right, that the Megillah is going to be read on the 11th, 12th, the 13th, 14th, and the 15th. Lo pachot v'lo yoter. Not more and not less. Okay? Which means not earlier than the 11th and not later than the 15th. So now comes the Gemara and says, Amale Resh Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, says the Resh Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan, Ikre kan. Right? On this, it's matin to say on the pasuk, Lotit Godedu. What does it mean Lotit Godedu? Right? How are you going? Why is it that we're going to come and make so many different tziburs in order to stop from Avera, right? From being over on the Isur, right? It says the Chachamim should have said one day for everybody. Why is it that they came and they started making so many different days? So says the Gemara, 1 second. I thought Lotit you needed it for the actual mashmaut. What's the mashmaut? Rachmana says, Lo tasu chabura al met. The Torah says you're not allowed to make a chabura, which is a blemish or a wound on your body for a met. Now, if so, how are you going to learn that when it says lotit go to do how do we know that there means that you're not allowed to make a gudot? So says the Gemara, the Gemara says, if so, the pasuk should have said lo tegodedu, mighty tgodedu, shemamina lehach yudata. It's coming to teach you that you should not make yourselves agudot. Meaning, not only you're not allowed to make a blemish for a met, you're also not allowed to make agudot. So says the Gemara, ve'ima kule lehach yudata. So I'm going to say maybe the entire pasuk is coming to teach you that you're not allowed to make agudot. Has nothing to do with chabura lamet. She says no. In kind of the pasuk, she should have said lemeka lo tagodu. Mai lo titgodu shmamina tarte. Teaches us two halachot. You're not allowed to make a chabura on your body because of a met, which means that if a person passes away, you're not allowed to come and start scratching yourself, punching yourself out, doing chaburot. Plus number 2, lo ta'asu agudot. Okay. So now that the Gemara is going to mention this, right? The Gemara is now going to say as follows. What is the answer of Rabbi Yochanan to Resh Lakish? At the end of the day, right, he's got a good question. If you shouldn't make yourselves into a whole bunch of different groups, so why do you have so many different days for Purim? Make one day for Purim, the Gamarnu. So Amalei comes and he tells him to Resh Lakish, Ad kan lo shanita, you didn't learn the next Mishnah. Makom shenagu la'asot melacha b'arvei pesachim achatzot, osin. Makom shenagu shelo la'asot, and osin. It has to do with a minhag. The minhag is that when they have a minhag to do melacha on Erev Pesach until Chatzot, they're allowed to do melacha on Erev Pesach until Chatzot. If they have the minhag to do not to do melacha, they don't do it. Now remember, after Chatzot, everybody is prohibited to do melacha on Erev Pesach. Okay, that's a very important halacha. A lot of people don't realize. Erev Pesach, after Chatzot, lechulema, you're not allowed to do melacha. When is the machloket in the minhag? Right? Not a machloket in minhag. When is there a minhag to do with it? Before Chatzot. So if you have a place where they have a minhag to work, you're allowed to work before Chatzot. If you have a minhag that you're not allowed to work that morning before Chatzot, also you're not allowed to work that morning before Chatzot. So you see from here, right, that also there's lot to go to do. So therefore, why are you asking only because of the Mishnah Megillah, and to do with how many days is the Mishnah, do you read the Megillah? What about Pesachim? So Amalei comes and he tells him, Amina lach ana isura, right? I'm going to tell you be'emet, right? That be'emet, the din is kovea zmanim shonim to do the Megillah. It should be an isur, which means why be'emet is not a question on this. He says, Damar Rav Shimon bar Abba Yochanan, lekayem et yimei hapurim haele bizmanehem. We learned this if you remember on Bet Amud Aleph there Masechet Megillah. What does it mean bizmanehem? Zmanim arbe tiknu lehem chachamim. Right? Right now they made an institution. That was what the chachamim already instituted. You're coming, you're asking me a minhag. Meaning, what are you coming and you're asking me from a minhag? I mean, they had a minhag on Erev Pesach before Chatzot. Yes, no, that's one thing. But that's a minhag of the people. It's not a takanat chachamim. Here, chachamim were the ones that came and they made such an institution. So if the chachamim made such an institution, why is there not lot to go to do? Right? It's not to do with a minhag. It's minhag, okay, fine, they come, they do the minhag or not. So says the Gemara, Vehatam lavi surah. He says there to do with doing melacha before Pesach, it's not an isur. But we learned in another Mishnah, Psachim Nun Amud Aleph. Halayla, that means we're talking about the night before Pesach. That Shammai says you're not allowed to do melacha. And Bet Hillel says you're allowed to do melacha. So it has nothing to do with minhag, it's also to do with an isur. That means, just like Bet Hillel come and they say, and just like some people do like Bet Shammai, there's agudot, right? There's also different groups in Judaism, sects in Judaism that are doing different things. So Amalei comes and he answers him, Hatam haroeh omer melacha hu delele. Says no. Over there to do with doing melacha on Erev Pesach, the one that's seeing the melacha, he's going to say that the reason why he's not doing the melacha is because, right, he's got nothing else what to do. So therefore, the fact that he's stopping from doing melacha, there's not lotit go to do. If you're refraining from something, that's not lotit go to do, right? But here you're doing actively, you're coming and doing, you're reading the Megillah on a different day. So Rabbi Yochanan now is going to come, right, and he's going to say, why didn't he ask it from our Mishnah? And that's why this is connected to our Mishnah. Bet Shammai come and they say that the tzarot of the 15 women, they're permitted to the brothers of the person that passed away. But Hillel says it's asur. Now, one second, if you go like the minhag Bet Shammai and other people do like the minhag Bet Hillel, you have lot to go to do. You have the agudot. So answers the Gemara in Yudalad Amud Aleph. Mi savrat asu Bet Shammai kedivrehem, lo asu Bet Shammai kedivrehem. He says, do you think that it says asu Bet Shammai kedivrehem means that na'agul ma'asel pishis tatam and they obligated tzadrat erva irbu muchalitza lemaaseh, right? They accepted upon themselves a shitav Bet Hillel that they were pturim completely. So everybody had the exact same minhag. There was no little to go to because even though they held differently in halacha, but lemaaseh they wouldn't do it. Therefore, since they wouldn't know lemaaseh, they did. Everyone did together. So therefore, there was no little to do. And then we're going to come back to the concept of little to do with what we just mentioned now with Bet Hillel and with Rabbi Yochanan and Shakish.